This story is titled, Step Mom and Dad Went on Vacation with Their Daughter, Leaving Me Alone and Laughing at Me. You are nothing but a freeloader living in our house like you own the place. So I made sure they didn't come back into my house. Hey everyone, before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Hi Reddit. I need to get this off my chest because even months later, I'm still unpacking everything that happened. I'll try not to ramble, but it's a story that started years ago, and I honestly didn't see any of it coming until it hit me like a train. My name's Ellie, and I'm 22 years old. What I'm about to tell you isn't some made-up family drama. It's my life, and I promise I never thought I'd find myself posting something like this here. But hey, life's funny like that. To really understand the chaos that went down, you need to know a bit of my backstory. My mom, Sarah, was the strongest woman I knew. She was a planner, down to the tiniest details of life. She worked as a senior accountant and was the kind of person who had everything neatly filed and sorted. Receipts, life insurance policies, you name it. She even wrote out a whole will years before she got sick. I used to think it was a little weird, but I get it now. She always said, I want to make sure you're okay no matter what. Mom passed away from intestinal cancer when I was 18. I don't know if any of you have dealt with something like that, but watching someone you love slowly deteriorate is devastating. She fought so hard for 4 years, though, and never once complained. She quit her job to focus on treatment, and somehow, through everything, she kept planning, making sure all the paperwork for the house, finances, and my future were solid. Before she passed, she sat me down and said, Ellie, this house is yours now. It's your home, and I want you to keep it. Promise me you'll always take care of it. I was so young at the time, just weeks away from starting college. I barely understood how any of it worked, but I knew one thing. That house was the last piece of her. My mom bought it before she even met my dad. She worked her butt off for it, paid off the mortgage, and built a beautiful life for us there. She made sure it would go to me, no one else. Here's where my dad comes into the picture. My parents divorced when I was 9. There was no big dramatic fallout, no custody battle, no fights over property. My dad just left. He met someone else, Diane, and decided he wanted a new life with her. He remarried pretty quickly and had my half-sister Maya. To be fair, Dad did one thing right. He paid for my college up front by putting money into a separate account. That was his version of child support, I guess. I wasn't angry back then. I just sort of accepted that I wasn't part of his new family anymore. I'd visit them sometimes during the holidays. Diane was never outright mean to me, but it was obvious she didn't really see me as family. She'd do that thing where she'd invite me for dinner, but act like she hoped I'd say no. Ellie, you're welcome to join us for dinner, she'd say in this overly cheerful voice while stirring a pot of something. It felt so forced that it made my skin crawl. Dad, meanwhile, was always working to provide for his family, his new family. Maya was about 10 years younger than me, and while I tried to bond with her, I always felt like a guest whenever I was at their house. You know when you're somewhere, and you just know you don't belong? That's how it felt. They lived in a rented house back then. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. Anyway, when Mom passed, I had no idea how to handle the house. I was too numb to think straight. Dad and Diane came over right after the funeral, and to my surprise, they offered to help me out. Dad said, Ellie, you can't live alone right now. It's too much to handle. Let us stay here for the summer, and we'll help take care of everything while you figure things out. I didn't argue. I was a mess. I'd just lost my mom, my anchor, and the thought of being alone in that big, quiet house scared me. Diane put on her best sympathetic face, acting like she was there for me, while Maya wandered through the house like it was a playground. I remember sitting in Mom's office, my office now, staring at her degrees on the wall and her neatly arranged financial books. She'd worked so hard to make sure I'd have a home, and yet I couldn't even bring myself to touch her things. I let Dad and Diane move into the spare room and Maya into what used to be Mom's craft room. By the end of the summer, I was getting ready to leave for college out of state. That's when Dad brought up the idea of them staying permanently. Over breakfast one morning, he pushed his coffee aside and said, Ellie, what if we stayed here while you're at school? You won't have to worry about bills, maintenance, or the house sitting empty. It'll be good for all of us. Diane chimed in, flipping pancakes at the stove. We'd take care of everything, Ellie. The house will be in perfect shape when you come home. At the time, it made sense. They'd been decent housemates over the summer. Diane had even softened up a bit, She'd cook meals for me and invite me to her weird little book club meetings where middle-aged women gushed over bad romance novels. Maya started calling me her cool sister, which I'll admit warmed my heart a little. So I agreed. I didn't see any harm in it. I trusted them. Over the next 4 years, I came home for breaks and holidays, and honestly, it was okay. Diane would cook huge welcome home dinners. Dad would crack stupid dad jokes, and Maya would show me her latest middle school drama. I started to believe we turned into this strange but functional blended family. Sure, there were little things, like Diane rearranging furniture or making subtle comments about the house, but I shrugged them off. It wasn't worth making waves. When I called Dad my senior year of college to tell him I'd accepted a job back in my hometown, he seemed thrilled. "That's great, Ellie. We'll have the house ready for you." I didn't think twice about it. I graduated, packed up my stuff, and made the long trip home, excited to start this new chapter. I should have known something was wrong when the taxi pulled up to the house, and I noticed new curtains in the windows. Little things had changed. The rose bushes Mom planted were still there, but they were pruned differently. The front porch looked repainted. I didn't think much of it until I walked up to the door, pulled out my key, and it didn't fit. That's when everything started to unravel. I'll never forget the exact moment I realized something was seriously wrong. The taxi dropped me off on a warm, sunny afternoon. It felt like such a perfect day to be starting fresh. I was 22, degree in hand, job secured, and ready to move back into the house that I thought would always be mine. I even remember taking a moment to stand in front of the house, suitcase in hand, breathing in that weird mix of roses and fresh-cut grass. Mom's rose bushes were still there, though someone had trimmed them differently, like the rounded way Diane always shaped things. It was little details like that that I noticed first. Subtle changes. I walked up the porch, pulled out my house key, and slid it into the lock, already picturing my first night back in my room. I'd spent the whole car ride imagining throwing my stuff on my bed, unpacking a bit, and sleeping like a rock after the long trip. But the key didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. I froze, mid-breath, just staring at the door like maybe I'd forgotten how locks worked. I jiggled the key. I turned it harder. Still nothing. No way. Maybe I'm overtired. Or maybe the lock's jammed. I knocked on the door, still half smiling, still hopeful. A moment later, Diane opened it, wearing an apron and looking like she'd just been baking, flour smudges on her hands and all. For half a second, her face went totally blank. Then she pasted on this fake smile and said, "Ellie, what are you doing here?" That question hit me like a slap. What was I doing here? I live here. Or at least I thought I did. I managed to stammer out, I'm moving back home. I told you guys about this, remember?" Her smile faltered. "Oh, right," she said, like she'd just remembered something she'd forgotten to put on the grocery list. She stepped aside reluctantly and let me in. The moment I rolled my suitcase inside, it was like stepping into a weird version of my house. The living room was different. Mom's furniture was still there, but it had been rearranged. Diane's tacky farmhouse decor, fake plants and cutesy signs that said things like "live, laugh, love," had taken over the mantel and the shelves. The old photo of Mom and me on the side table? Gone. A new family photo of Dad, Diane, and Maya was there instead. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, but I tried to stay calm. In the living room, Dad was sitting in Mom's old armchair, the one she used to curl up in with a book after work. He looked up from his tablet and did this awkward double take when he saw me. Maya was sprawled on the couch, her phone in hand, earbuds in. She barely glanced at me. "Hey, you're back!" Dad said, sounding like he was trying way too hard to sound cheerful. "Yeah," I replied, forcing a small smile. "Why are the locks changed?" At that, Dad scratched the back of his neck. His nervous habit always has been. "Oh, that. I changed them last month. There were a couple of break-ins in the neighborhood, so, for safety." "You didn't think to give me a new key?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, but I was already feeling weird about the whole situation. Diane, who was hovering behind me, jumped in. "We didn't think you'd be here so soon." "I graduated last week," I said, looking between them. "I told you guys I'd be moving back home for my job. I literally sent you the date I'd be here." Diane didn't respond. She just crossed her arms and stared at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Dad stood up and gestured toward the office. "Ellie, can we talk privately for a second?" I followed him, suitcase still in hand, my heart pounding. Mom's old office looked more or less the same, though I noticed some of her books had been pushed aside for Diane's stuff. Dad shut the door behind us, and when he turned to face me, I saw it. He was nervous. Like he already knew what he was about to say was going to piss me off. "Listen," he started, his voice low. There's something I need to tell you. Those words made my stomach drop. Dad hesitated, his hands twitching at his sides. Diane, she thinks this house is mine, that I let you live here after your mom passed. I stared at him, not comprehending. What? He sighed, looking at the floor. I never told her the truth, that your mom bought the house and left it to you. I told her I gave it to your mom after the divorce, and that it reverted to me when she passed. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, staring at him, feeling like the air had been knocked out of me. My house. My mom's house. The one thing she fought so hard to make sure I'd have. And he lied about it? To Diane? For 4 years? I had to, Ellie, Dad continued, still not meeting my eyes. You don't understand what it's like. Diane wouldn't have agreed to live here if she thought it wasn't mine. I found my voice again, though it came out shaky. So what? You let her think she owns my house? And now I'm supposed to just, disappear? He grabbed my arm, pleading. No, it's not like that. Just give me a little time to fix this. I'll tell her the truth, I promise. Just not yet. I don't want to ruin my marriage. Please. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father was asking me to lie, to let them stay in my house, the house my mom worked her whole life to buy, because he was too much of a coward to admit the truth to his wife. I took the keys he handed me for the new locks, but I was done. I felt sick. I felt betrayed. But mostly, I felt like an idiot for trusting them. I agreed to let him fix it. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't going to end well. That night at dinner, the tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Diane sat at the head of the table, smiling like nothing was wrong, but I caught her glancing at me every now and then. Sharp, calculating looks that made my skin crawl. Maya ignored me completely, and Dad barely spoke. I picked at my food, my mind spinning. This was only the beginning. I could feel it. You know how sometimes people don't have to say anything outright for you to know exactly how they feel about you? That's what living with Diane turned into. Constant, unspoken hostility wrapped in fake politeness. Dad was no better. He avoided me completely, as though ignoring the situation would make it disappear. It was as if I'd walked into someone else's house and had overstayed my welcome, except it was my house. The first few days were awkward but tolerable. I spent most of my time in my room unpacking my stuff, catching up with old friends over texts, and trying to process everything Dad had told me. The tension wasn't as bad at first, more like that quiet kind where you can feel people watching you. Diane would pop into the kitchen while I was making coffee and make passive remarks like, "Oh, you're up early. You must be on a college schedule still." Or, "Are you cooking for yourself tonight? I didn't realize you'd be eating in." The thing is, she wasn't yelling, but every comment carried an undertone that screamed, "You don't belong here." Then things escalated, fast. On a Wednesday morning, I was about to throw in a load of laundry. I'd left my clothes sorted in the laundry room and went to grab detergent. By the time I came back, Diane was pulling my clothes out of the washer and tossing them into a basket. My white shirts were suddenly mixed with dark clothes that hadn't been washed yet. I froze and just watched her for a second. "Oh," she said, like she'd only just noticed me. "I thought this was Maya's basket. You really should label your stuff. They were sorted," I said flatly. "And Maya doesn't do her own laundry, does she?" Her smile was razor thin. "Well, I can't keep track of everyone's messes around here." She picked up her cup of tea and walked out, leaving my clothes in a crumpled pile. I knew what she was doing. She wanted me to react, to cause a scene, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. That night at dinner, she made just enough food for 3 people. I didn't realize until I came to the table and saw 3 plates set. One for her, one for Dad, and one for Maya. She looked up at me and said, "Oh, Ellie, I thought you were eating out tonight." "You didn't say anything." "I live here," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You didn't ask." She shrugged and smiled, a fake sweetness to it. "Well, there's bread in the pantry if you're hungry." I sat there for a second, considering walking out or even flipping out on her, but instead, I just grabbed my coat and left. I couldn't stand sitting across from them another second. I ended up at the local diner, eating a sandwich alone and texting one of my old friends from high school. "Please tell me you're free tomorrow. I need to get out of the house," I wrote. The next day, I reconnected with my friend Emily. She still lived nearby, and when I told her about the situation, she gave me that wide-eyed look you give someone when you can't believe what you're hearing. "Wait, they're living in your house? Acting like you're the guest?" "Ellie, what the hell?" "I don't know what to do," I admitted. "Dad's too much of a coward to tell Diane the truth, and she's trying to make my life miserable. I feel like I'm losing my mind." We spent the afternoon hanging out, catching up on life, and for a few hours I almost felt like myself again. Emily even joked, If she keeps pushing, I'll come over and put her in her place for you. It made me laugh, but when I got home, the dread came rushing back. The house was dark and silent. I flicked on the hallway light and noticed something odd. My shoes, which I'd left neatly by the door, had been moved into the coat closet. It was a small thing, but it sent a clear message. Diane didn't want any trace of me visible in her space. Over the next week, she doubled down. I'd wake up to find my things moved around, like my coffee mug mysteriously shoved to the back of the cabinet, or my mail accidentally tossed into a pile of junk. One morning, I went to take a shower only to realize the hot water was ice cold. Maya had conveniently taken a 45-minute shower right before me. Diane made a show of saying, "Oh, Ellie, I guess you'll just have to get up earlier. Maya's growing, and she takes longer these days." The worst part was watching Maya change. When we were younger, she used to follow me around like a little shadow. She'd call me her big sister and beg me to braid her hair. Now, she rolled her eyes whenever I walked into the room and muttered things like, "She's so lazy, Mom." I even overheard her on the phone saying, "I don't know why she's still here. It's not even her house." That hurt more than I care to admit. And then there was Dad. I swear I could feel him avoiding me. He'd come home late or go for walks anytime Diane started needling me in front of him. If I caught him alone and tried to talk about it, he'd just mumble something about keeping the peace. Keeping the peace? For who? I hit my breaking point when Diane moved Mom's favorite vase. It had been on the mantel for as long as I could remember. This beautiful ceramic vase with blue flowers painted on it. One day I came home and found it shoved onto a random shelf in the corner, almost hidden. In its place was one of Diane's tacky, rustic pieces, an ugly wooden sign that said, "Home Sweet Home." I asked her about it directly. "Why did you move the vase?" "Oh," she said, not even looking up from her tablet. "I just thought it didn't match the new style I'm going for in here. I'm sure you understand." I didn't reply, but I felt something snap inside me. That vase was more than just decor. It was a piece of my mom, a memory of her, and Diane had no right to touch it. That night, I started packing up Diane's things in my head. I wasn't ready to act yet, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this. By the time Saturday morning rolled around, I felt like I was living in someone else's house, an unwelcome guest in my own home. The hostility from Diane had grown so thick that even walking into the kitchen felt like stepping into enemy territory. I avoided being in the common spaces when she or Maya were around, just to keep my sanity. That morning, though, something was off. I woke up to silence. Total silence. No sound of Diane in the kitchen banging pots, no Maya blasting pop music from her room, and no Dad watching the morning news on TV. It was eerie. At first, I thought maybe they'd just gone out for breakfast or something, but the house felt abandoned. It was too clean. The kitchen counters were spotless, the dining table was empty, and even the shoes that were always cluttered near the front door were gone. I stood there barefoot, still in my pajamas, my stomach sinking. I checked my phone. Nothing. No texts, no missed calls. I tried calling Dad first. Straight to voicemail. That's weird. I tried him again. Same result. By this point, I felt like something wasn't right. Maybe it was paranoia after weeks of tension with Diane, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a regular Saturday morning. Finally, I dialed Diane. I was about to hang up after the fourth ring when she picked up. Her voice was sharp. "What do you want?" Her tone caught me completely off guard. I just wanted to know where everyone is. I woke up and the house is empty." She laughed. Not a normal laugh. A mean, ugly sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives. You know, sunny beaches, luxury resorts, the whole deal." I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "What? The Maldives?" "First-class flights and everything," she added with mock cheer. "We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along. You're not exactly in the position to pay your way, are you?" My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" That's when she dropped the act completely. "I'm talking about you living in our house like some entitled brat," she spat. "Your father might be too soft to say it, but I'm not. You're a freeloader, Ellie. You've been mooching off us long enough. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman squatting in our house while we're paying all the bills?" I could barely breathe. My hands were shaking, and I sank into one of the kitchen chairs, my legs too weak to hold me up. "It's not your house," I managed to choke out. "It's my house." She ignored me. "We're done, Ellie. When we get back, I want you gone. I don't care where you go. Sleep on a park bench for all I care. But you're not staying here. If you're still in that house when we come back, I'll personally throw you out." In the background, I could hear Maya laughing and Dad saying something I couldn't quite make out. The sound of it twisted the knife deeper. "Diane, you don't..." Don't bother trying to call your father, she interrupted, her voice icy. He agrees with me. He's just too weak to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life, Ellie. And then she hung up. I sat there in shock, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I stared at the phone, half expecting her to call back and say it was some cruel joke, but she didn't. My father's silence on the other end had been enough to confirm everything. They were gone, on vacation, living it up on a tropical island while I sat alone in what was supposed to be my house. And the worst part? They planned to throw me out when they got back. For the first few minutes, I just sat there, my mind blank. I couldn't process it. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that my dad, my own father, had let this happen. He didn't stop her. He didn't stand up for me. He just went along with it. But the shock didn't last long. It turned into something else. Something I hadn't felt in weeks. Rage. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they'd forgotten one very important thing. This was my house. I spent the next hour sitting in that chair, staring at the walls, replaying the conversation in my head. Diane's voice echoed over and over. Freeloader, squatter, embarrassing. It wasn't just what she said, but the way she said it. Like I was some useless parasite clinging to their perfect lives. Like I didn't belong here. Well, I wasn't going to let her win. By noon, I had a plan. First things first, I blocked their numbers. I didn't want to hear a word from any of them, not even Dad. Then I called a locksmith. Emergency service? The guy asked when I explained what I needed. Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. As soon as possible. The locksmith arrived that afternoon, an older guy with kind eyes who didn't ask too many questions. He changed every lock in the house. Front door, back door, garage door, you name it. It cost me more than I wanted to spend. But at that point, I didn't care. Anyone else have keys to these doors? He asked as he handed me the new set. Not anymore, I replied. Once the locks were changed, I grabbed some garbage bags and boxes and started packing up their stuff. I was done pretending like everything was fine. If Diane and Dad thought they could waltz back into my house after treating me like garbage, they were in for a surprise. I went room by room. Diane's expensive clothes? Packed. Her fancy bathroom products cluttering up the counters? Into a bag. Maya's toys, school supplies, and whatever else she'd left lying around? Boxed up. Dad's golf clubs, the ones he never used but always bragged about having, went straight into the garage. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, and the garage was packed full of their things. It was exhausting, but it felt good, like I was reclaiming what was mine piece by piece. I sat on the couch that night, staring at the clean, empty space that had been taken over for years. It felt strange, quiet, but it also felt like home again. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in forever. I brewed myself a cup of coffee, sat in Mom's old chair, and watched the sunlight stream through the window. I knew this was just the beginning. Diane wasn't going to let this go without a fight, and Dad, well, I didn't know what to expect from him anymore. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going anywhere. Point. It was a Friday evening when the storm hit. I'd been expecting it. Honestly, I'd spent the whole week mentally preparing for the explosion that was bound to happen once they came back and saw what I'd done. I even rehearsed what I'd say, over and over again, so I wouldn't stumble or give them a chance to manipulate me. That afternoon, I'd come home from work, dropped my bag by the door, and noticed how quiet the house was. It wasn't the eerie, empty quiet I'd felt that morning after Diane's call. No. This was the kind of quiet that felt right. It felt like peace. My peace. I had just sat down with my laptop to catch up on some emails when I heard the car pull into the driveway. The sound of tires crunching on gravel made my stomach twist, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't move from my spot on the couch as I listened to doors slam, footsteps pound up the walkway, and then the sound of Diane trying, and failing, to unlock the front door. She started banging on it immediately. Ellie! Her voice was already shrill. Ellie, what the hell is going on? Why won't the door open? I let her bang for another 30 seconds before I stood up, grabbed the new keys from the counter, and walked to the door. I took my sweet time unlocking it, savoring the brief pause in her yelling. When I finally opened the door, I was greeted with Diane's furious face. Her hair was a mess, her face red, and she looked like she was ready to bite my head off. Behind her, Dad stood stiff and awkward, looking anywhere but at me, and Maya was hanging back near the car, her arms crossed and scowling. What did you do? Diane demanded, shoving her way past me into the entryway. Why did you change the locks? I stepped aside and let her storm in. Dad followed quietly, His shoulders hunched, avoiding my gaze. Maya trailed after him, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Diane turned on me immediately. I want an explanation. Right now. I crossed my arms and met her glare without flinching. It's pretty simple, I said. This is my house. You don't live here anymore. Her mouth fell open like I'd slapped her. Your house? Yes, my house. The house my mom bought, the house she left to me, the one you've been living in under a lie for the last 4 years. For a split second, the room went silent. Diane looked at Dad, her face full of confusion and growing anger. What is she talking about? Dad didn't answer. He just stood there, frozen. I turned to him, my voice sharp. Tell her, Dad. Tell her the truth. Diane spun to face him. What truth? What is she saying? Dad mumbled something I couldn't hear. His voice was so quiet, I thought he might have been choking on his own guilt. Speak up, Diane snapped. What is she talking about, Richard? Dad finally looked up, his face pale. It's true, he said, his voice weak. The house. It's not mine. It never was. Sarah bought it before we were married. She left it to Ellie, in her will. For a second, Diane just stared at him, blinking as though she couldn't process the words. Then her face turned a deep shade of red. You lied to me? Dad flinched, like she'd struck him. I didn't mean... You told me this was your house, she shrieked. You said you let Ellie stay here out of the goodness of your heart. Do you have any idea how stupid this makes me look? Her voice was loud enough that I was sure the neighbors could hear, but I didn't care. Let her scream. Let her throw her tantrum. I'd spent weeks feeling like a stranger in my own home. She could deal with a little reality. Diane turned back to me, her eyes blazing. You ungrateful little brat. After everything we've done for you? I cut her off. Everything you've done for me? Like what? Trying to erase my mom from this house? Calling me a freeloader? Planning to throw me out? That's not helping, Diane. She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. Your stuff is in the garage. Take it and leave. At that, Maya finally spoke up. Mom, let's just go. Her voice was quiet, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger in her expression. Embarrassment, maybe. She looked at me for half a second before turning away again. Diane ignored her. We are not leaving, she snarled. This is our home, too. No, it's not, I said, my voice steady. It's mine, and I want you out. Dad finally stepped forward, looking like he wanted to fix everything with a single sentence. Ellie, please, he said, his voice trembling. We don't have anywhere to go right now. Just give us a few weeks. I held up my hand. No. His face crumbled. Please, sweetheart. I know I messed up, but we're family. Family doesn't treat each other like this, I shot back. You let this happen. You let Diane think this was her house. You let her treat me like garbage. And you stood there and said nothing. Dad had nothing to say to that. He just looked down at the floor like a scolded child. Diane, on the other hand, wasn't ready to give up. You're a selfish little girl, she spat. You think you're so high and mighty because of this house? You wouldn't even have it if it weren't for your father. I laughed bitterly. My father had nothing to do with this house. Mom bought it with her own money before you or him were even part of the picture. She made sure it would be mine because she knew I couldn't count on him. That shut her up. I turned back to Dad. You can take your stuff and leave. I'm done with this. For a moment, nobody moved. Diane stared at me like she wanted to lunge at me, but Dad finally nodded. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Fine, he whispered. It took them about an hour to load their things into the car. Diane didn't stop muttering under her breath the entire time, calling me names, swearing about how ungrateful I was. Dad just looked hollow. Maya stayed quiet, helping carry things without a word. When they were done, Dad knocked on the door one last time. I didn't open it. I watched from the window as they drove away, Diane's voice still faintly audible through the glass. The house was quiet again when they were gone. For the first time in years, it felt like it belonged to me, like it belonged to Mom. I sat down on the couch and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They were gone. Finally. EC point. It's been 2 months since that day. Dad still tries to call from random numbers, but I don't pick up. Some relationships can't be fixed. And honestly, I don't want to. I'm focusing on myself now. My job is great. I've made friends at work, and I'm slowly healing from all of this. I planted new roses in Mom's garden, ones she would have loved, and I'm finally at peace here. To anyone reading this who's dealing with toxic family, sometimes you have to let go. You don't owe anyone your peace, especially not people who take advantage of you. Mom made sure I'd always have a home, and now I'm making sure I honor her by living in it the way she intended.
Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best. so you don't miss new stories.
What if an outwardly perfect family life hides cheating and deceit? Learn how one unexpected discovery destroyed 25 years of marriage. Today's story is a similar story. Enjoy watching it. A year ago, our children threw us a party to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary. It was a grand event with all the trappings. All our friends were invited, and we received a bunch of gag gifts. Life seemed pretty good at that moment, even though I knew we were slowly growing apart while living in the same house. My wife Carol and I met in our final year of university, and it's been history ever since. We fell in love, got married, and had 2 wonderful sons, both of whom are now graduating from college. We are now almost empty nesters and should have enjoyed the fruits of our labors, but we had a little problem. I'm younger, but she's not. I didn't get physically younger, rather, I had a midlife crisis when I turned 50 this year. Don't let anyone tell you that 50 is just a number and you shouldn't worry about it, because it is. I began to look back and ask myself, what if, and I was determined never to say those words again. The pressure of caring for children was relieved, and for the first time, we had a lot of free time and money. It was like a huge weight had been lifted from my chest, and I felt more alive than I had in a long time. I received 4 weeks of vacation time from work each year and had accumulated another 4 weeks of unused sick and vacation time over the years. What the hell was I going to do with 8 weeks off? I started making changes, small ones at first. I stopped dressing like my father. My suits and my entire wardrobe were outdated to say the least and needed to be updated for the 21st century. Plus, I had somehow gained some fat around my waist over the last 10 years and had to get rid of it before I went crazy. I bought myself new clothes. When I told Carol I wanted more salads and less meat, she didn't say anything. But when I started getting up early to go to the gym before work, she noticed. She probably thought it was just a phase, like my New Year's resolutions that eventually passed, but it didn't. It took me 3.5 months of hard work to lose the 18 pounds I had gained. It gave me more energy, and it seemed like our intimacy life was fading over time. Steve, I'm not 20 years old anymore. I can't do this 5 times a week, she told me very firmly. You don't take Viagra, do you? What if we agree on 3 times a week? I asked, or rather begged, Carol if she would consider it. She said she would think about it but didn't guarantee anything. As usual, nothing has changed. You see, we are stuck in a rut. We both get up for work in the morning at about 6 o'clock, just 5 minutes apart. We drink coffee for breakfast together while I look through the newspaper. We both commute to work, which starts at 8 o'clock, and I leave between 5 o'clock and 5:30 for a 25-minute drive home. When I get home, I check my mail, change my clothes, and usually set the table. Carol arrives at 4:30, and by the time I arrive, she is already cooking something. We have dinner, wash the dishes, and then read the newspaper. At this point, we split up and go about our business for the next 2 hours before getting ready for bed. I would lay out my clothes for the next day, brush my teeth, floss, and then sit in bed to watch the news. The next day, we did the same boring things over and over again. We were becoming like our parents, and I wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. It lifted her spirits, but it didn't bring us closer. When we didn't make love for the first week, I didn't say anything. When this went on for 2 weeks, I started dropping hints. Damn, when this went on for 3 weeks. Steve, what kind of question is that? Of course I like it. Then why don't we do this more often? Steve, we do this all the time. Honey, it's been 3 weeks. I haven't bothered you, but I wanted to wait and see how long you wouldn't notice. But it seems like you didn't notice. If so, we better get started because it's getting late. Carol, I don't see this as some kind of duty that needs to be done and forgotten. I think of it as something special that brings us closer together. I tried to explain, but she didn't listen. Steve, do you want to do this or not? She finally asked, annoyed that I criticized her for not wanting to have intimacy anymore. It looks like no, I'm not in the mood anymore, I told her sharply. Let's get to work on this, otherwise, you won't let me forget it. I'll refuse, she said, getting up and going to the bathroom. I took 3 Advil for the headache I now had, went back to bed, and said goodnight to her with my back turned. Don't say I didn't offer, Carol said with a disdainful tone as she opened her book. I stopped asking after that night. I moved my workouts from the morning to the evening, which meant we no longer had dinner together. I liked it better because it gave me a chance to relax after work and there were more people in the gym to socialize with. Carol started leaving me a plate of leftovers in the oven, but after 2 months that stopped, and I started making my own dinner or stopping after a workout for a snack. We were growing more and more distant from each other, and if I saw it, then she must have seen it too. It had been almost 4 months since our last lovemaking session, and I was determined to get her to initiate it, even if it took forever. My evening showers were getting longer and longer. I started replacing or updating my clothes piece by piece, and even a few women at work noticed, but my wife didn't say a word. Are you going to stop being so depressed this year, or should I book you for next January? Carol said as I turned off the light that night. What? You heard me. You're playing a stupid game, and I'm tired of it, she said, with the tension in her voice that I was already used to. Could you explain what game you're talking about? I asked. Steve, don't make a fool of yourself. Just because I don't give you intimacy 24 hours a day, you're sulking, but it won't work. She now screamed at me, Carol, you asked me not to pester you about intimacy anymore. I'm just doing what you asked. You said you weren't 20 anymore and weren't interested in it, so I was just waiting for you to be in the mood. Don't tell me that crap. You're punishing me for not lying spread-eagled on the bed every night, but that won't work. I can take as much as you, she said smugly. Listen to yourself, Carol. I wanted to make love to my wife, and you saw it as just another chore to do before bed. I decided to wait until you wanted to do it rather than have to, like you did, colorfully expressed. Instead, you took it as a challenge to see how long I could last. It's quite pathetic. Looks like I was right a few months ago. You don't really enjoy it with me anymore, do you? She just looked at me angrily and left the bedroom, slamming the door. I think this answered my question. Life became even more stressful after that night. Carol now slept in the guest room and tried to avoid me in the evenings. When I told her my company's corporate dinner was in 2 weeks, she simply shrugged. Saturday night before dinner, I had just showered and wondered why I couldn't hear Carol getting ready. After I finished getting dressed, I went to look for her. Why aren't you ready yet? We have to leave in half an hour, I said to my wife, who was still dressed in shorts and a casual blouse. I'm not going, she said. How is it that you're not coming? I asked in an unfriendly tone. When you start treating me like a wife, I'll start acting like one. Until then, you're alone, she replied, crossing her arms over her chest. Come on, Carol, stop talking nonsense and get dressed, I said. I won't go, she repeated firmly. Okay, keep playing your damn game, I said as I started to leave and grabbed my keys. I was angry, irritated, and with a bunch of other feelings. It was my company's annual dinner, and it was the first time I had to go alone, and I didn't like it. I told everyone that Carol wasn't feeling well and decided to have a good time anyway. I didn't even notice how many single women worked in my company. I guess when you're married, you don't pay attention to it. But that evening, I noticed it. I danced with each of them at least once. I'm not the best dancer, but I had no complaints. It looks like I drank a little more than I should have and needed help getting home. Diana from customer service lived next door to me and said she would make sure to get me there safe and sound. I ended the night with 2 more dances and 1 drink. As I walked out into the parking lot, my eyes became the size of saucers when I saw what Diana was driving, a black 2005 Mustang Cobra. Oh my God, Diana, is this your car? This was my husband's toy before he died a year ago. He died of cancer. Can you handle such a machine? Have a seat, handsome, and I'll show you what's under the hood. Holy. Oh my God, were just 3 phrases I used as we took the scenic route to my house. Diana changed gears like a racer and pinned me to the seat more than once. When she finally stopped bragging, we slowed down to the speed limit. I left her motionless for 6 months before I got up the courage to take her out. She told me, I haven't driven a manual car in years and had to learn quickly. It has a lot of horsepower, but you get used to it. For me, it's a fun car for the weekend to get rid of the stress of the week. If only you weren't so drunk, I'd let you ride, she said, smiling at me. A drive that should have taken 20 minutes ended up taking an hour and a half because we stopped for coffee at Denny's. She told me about her husband, and I felt obligated to share about Carol. You two should stop playing these games. Life is too short to miss a day. Trust me, I know, she said. I agreed but told her that it takes two to tango. She sped down my street because there were no other cars on the road at 2 o'clock in the morning. No problem getting in. My problems will start as soon as I get in, I told her with a smirk. She once again told me to get my head and that she would see me at work on Monday. As I approached the house, I saw Carol look out the window for a second. It looked like she was waiting for me after all. Do you have any idea what time it is? Carol asked angrily. I have no idea who gave you a lift. This is Diana, she works with me, I replied. I saw her kiss you. What was that for? For nothing, I guess. I just danced with her tonight because my wife didn't bother to come with me, I said, looking at her. So if you'll excuse me, I'm tired and I've had too much to drink. If you want to discuss Diana and all the other girls I danced with tonight, I'll be more than happy to discuss it, but not now. Tomorrow, after breakfast, I said, going up the stairs. I slept like a baby. The next month, I tried to bury the hatchet. I didn't ask for intimacy but moved my training back to the morning so we could have dinner together again. I was getting sick of all this nonsense, but I decided to give it a couple more weeks before bringing it up again. That's when Carol did something stupid. I was going through my mail on Thursday when I found a receipt for a cruise ticket for next week. What is this? I asked, holding it in my hands. I was going to tell you tonight. My sister and I are going on a 7-day Caribbean cruise. It starts this Sunday and runs until next Saturday. I just need some time to think about my life, and you can't do it here with me, but you can with your sister. Carol, this is a big problem. If we get any further apart, there's a good chance we'll never get back together. Is that what you want? Steve, I don't know what I want anymore, she said, looking at me. Well, now I know the answer, I said, crumpling the ticket and throwing it at her. I think I heard her shout something after me, but I was already at the door before I heard it. I think I finally reached my limit. I went out to dinner alone and went to 2 strip clubs. These were the first breasts I had seen in 5 months, and they looked attractive to me. I spent $30 on tips and bought 2 girls drinks before finally leaving a little after 1 in the morning. As I drove home, I thought about all the places I wanted to visit but never had the chance. One that stood out was California wineries. I love wine and could never convince Carol to go there. She thought it would be boring as hell. I figured if she can go on vacation with her sister, then so can I. Carol was sleeping when I came home. She left me a note saying I was stubborn for leaving without giving her a chance to explain herself. Am I a fool? I said to myself, crumpling up the note and throwing it across the kitchen. I blurted out as I went upstairs and gathered enough clothes to leave. The Holiday Inn across from work was my logical choice since I had only slept 3 hours Thursday night. I told my secretary that, under no circumstances, should I receive any calls from my wife, Carol. I turned off my cell phone and decided to hide for the next 72 hours. I checked out the winery tours. A 10-day tour, including airfare, food, and transportation, would cost me just over $2,500. I booked it for Saturday when Carol was due back. I turned on my cell phone just once and found 8 calls from Carol asking where I was and why I wasn't answering my calls. I asked Diana what she was doing this Saturday afternoon. If you're not busy, I'd like to take you up on your offer for a ride. You think you're man enough to handle this? She said with a smile. I think we'll both figure it out, I said, smiling back. How about 1 o'clock on Saturday afternoon? I got the address from her and said, I'll see you then. This would settle the matter for Saturday, and Carol would be leaving on Sunday, I thought to myself. On Friday, I stayed at work a little longer than usual and completed all my tasks. I applied for leave and requested my leave check next Friday. I was really looking forward to it. It's just a shame Carol won't be going with me. I slept in late Saturday morning and had a good breakfast in the hotel dining room. It was a beautiful day, and I made sure to dress appropriately in casual pants and sneakers. When I arrived, Diana had just finished washing the windshield. When she saw me, she smiled. "Just making sure you'd see clearly. You know, that's one of the first things that gets worse when you hit 50, she said, laughing. "I think it's number 3, but damn it, I don't remember numbers 1 and 2. Her car drove like a dream, a little stiff due to the racing suspension but still great. After some time, I could change gears without thinking about what I was doing and even try to accelerate sharply to 95 miles per hour before realizing I was approaching that speed. I need to buy something more exciting than my current Volvo. It's too much for me, but maybe a Corvette could do, I told her as we slowed to a more sedate pace. Something I could drive to work every day and it wouldn't bankrupt me. It was after 4 o'clock when we stopped for gas on the way back to her house. "Diana, do you have plans for dinner? I feel like I owe you more than a tank of gas for your troubles." "Don't you have plans with your wife this evening?" she asked, looking me up and down. "Not today." "How about it?" "My bill, if you say so," she replied. "It's agreed. I need to take a shower, so pick me up at around 6 if that's convenient for you." 6 is great, but dress casually. I know a good Italian place with great food and a great wine list. I had 5 more calls from Carol. I listened to each one as they became increasingly angry. "Damn it, Steve, call me. I'm leaving tomorrow and we need to talk before then," was the last message. I erased it along with the others. The food was excellent, and we shared a bottle of wine during our meal. I didn't bring up Carol, but Diana did. "How are things going with you and your wife?" she asked, sipping wine. "No way. She's leaving on a 7-day Caribbean cruise with her sister tomorrow," I told her. "I thought you were going to work on your problems." I tried, but she didn't want to talk to me. When I found out about the cruise, I just left. It was pretty stupid. Diana said without mincing words. She said she needed time away from me to think about us and where we were going. How can we work on a relationship if we don't discuss our problems? Anyway, she's leaving tomorrow for the Caribbean, and I'm leaving on a 10-day winery tour next Saturday. You're both playing catch-up, and you're both going to lose. Look, if it's over, so be it. Stop these stupid games. But if there's even the slightest chance, you should take it instead of going on separate vacations. She criticized what we were doing. We haven't slept in the same bed in over 6 months. I think my marriage is on the brink of death, and with her leaving, she's basically pulled the plug. When I get back, we'll split everything equally and go our separate ways. I still have enough years to start over before I'm 95 and in a wheelchair. I still think you're both making a mistake, but it's your life. I took her home a little after 10. She invited me in, saying she was alone because her only daughter was away at college, but I refused, knowing that if I had one more drink, I wouldn't be able to drive. The week dragged on as I waited for my trip. I sorted out my clothes and even bought 3 more sets because I had lost another 5 pounds. I figured I could fit everything into 2 medium suitcases, which was the maximum the airline would allow without extra charge. Carol sent me 2 emails telling me that when she got back, we needed to talk. This could be a problem since I wasn't even going to be here. I thought about not leaving any note but decided against it. I wrote, "See you in 2 weeks, at least she'd know I wasn't lying dead in some ditch." Why I didn't do this before is a mystery to me, because 2 days later I was hooked. Every other day we went to different wineries, did excursions during the day, and wine tastings in the evening. I was with a group of 4 couples, a mother and daughter, and 1 single woman besides myself. We ate together, went on excursions, and generally spent time together. On the 4th day, the only other single member of our group approached me. "Steve, right?" she asked. "Yes, it's me." "And your name is Lori, right?" I answered with a smile. "Since we're both here alone, would you like to join me on an optional excursion to the old Spanish missions tomorrow?" she suggested. "They need at least 2 people, and you're the only one I know here." "Sounds great. I'm glad I brought a good camera." They said it would take about 4 hours, including travel time and the tour itself. They will send a car for us right after our tour of the winery tomorrow. Lori organized everything. We sat together at dinner that evening. Lori was divorced and said she decided to do something new every year. She took up diving last year after receiving her certification and planned to go on a cruise to Alaska next year. After this, who knows, she told me. I see you are married. Why isn't your wife with you? She's on a 7-day Caribbean cruise. You don't like cruises? They weren't invited. She decided to take her sister with her, I said quietly, sipping a glass of wine. Sorry, I didn't mean to pry. It's okay. I wouldn't have gone anyway. She doesn't seem to value my company anymore. Well, her loss. So as of this evening, you're officially my date for the rest of this tour. That way, you'll always have someone to eat and talk to, Lori said. We all eat together and always talk to each other, I said, looking at her with confusion. I know, it's just official now, she said, smiling and taking my hand. The tour was great, and I enjoyed Lori's company more and more. She mentioned that her ex-husband replaced her with a younger model. I made him pay dearly for that act. Not only did I get half of our assets, but also monthly alimony, which pays for all my little adventures. It's a pity I didn't catch him sooner. I would have loved to try mountaineering, but at 45, I'm not going to take any risks. I've always wanted to go on a wind-powered cruise with few amenities, sailing from island to island. I would have done it already if it weren't for the fact that my wife is a sailor, and I paid for my son's college education before this year. Don't wait until you're too old to enjoy it, I told her. She warned me. We talked until almost midnight. Everyone else had already gone to bed. When I walked her to her cabin, she kissed me on the cheek and told me that she had a wonderful time and that I was the best companion. I bet you say that to every married man you date, I told her. Actually, no, because you're the first. If I didn't know your past, we wouldn't have even gone out tonight. I'm not a homewrecker. I've been in this situation, so you're lucky. Sleep well, we have a big day tomorrow, she said, hugging me and giving me another kiss. I returned to my hut excited and dealt with it on my own. Before I went to bed, I turned on my cell phone and, lo and behold, had 9 messages from Carol. The first ones were quite sharp and short, but the last 3 sounded much more sincere. Steve, please call. I don't know where you are, and I need to talk to you, she begged. Now she wanted to talk after basically telling me to go to hell for the last 4 months. I erased them again and turned off the phone. 2 days into our trip, we stopped at the most beautiful winery we could imagine. It was built on top of a hill overlooking a lush valley. That evening, during the wine tasting, the sun was setting, and it was almost breathtaking. I took a few pictures, even photographing Lori against the sunset. I was having the time of my life. The rooms at the wineries were simply small cubicles with minimal amenities, a shower, a bedroom, and a small living room. One by one, the couples retreated to their booths until only Lori and I remained. This is life, I said, dreaming out loud. I could get used to doing this full time, traveling to all the wineries here in California, and maybe then expanding to Italy and Germany. In 2 years, they'll have to take you on a forklift after you gain a couple 100 pounds, she laughed. Between the wine, cheese, and rich food, I think I've gained 5 pounds, she said, stroking her belly. You're not fat, you look good, I replied. Flattery will get you everywhere, she said, finishing her glass of wine. Let's go for a walk, she suggested, taking the last bottle of wine. The path was lit with torches as we slowly walked around the winery itself. I wasn't drunk, but I wasn't completely sober either. How long have you been awake? I asked. About an hour. It felt like someone was looking at me, she said with a smile, pulling me to her lips. My breath must have smelled bad enough to kill a fly, but she didn't seem to care. We'd better get up, the bus will pick us up at 9, she said, jumping out of bed, throwing off her t-shirt, and heading to the shower. The hour-long drive flew by in a flash as we chatted about all sorts of things. This was our last winery, and I wasn't happy about it at all. We still had a day and a half left and decided to make the most of them. Like all the other wineries, I bought a case of the wine I liked and sent it all home. I made a note to buy a wine cooler as soon as I got home. We walked hand in hand on our last night for dinner, feeling sad that our trip was coming to an end. That last night, We made a total of 6 toasts before we each went to bed in turn. I walked Lori back to her cabin and told her I had to pack my things that night. We kissed. "I'll miss you," we both said at the same time, laughing out loud. After another kiss and hug, she went inside. It took me about 20 minutes to pack all my things. I found my airline tickets and parking pass, making sure I knew where everything was. I had washed myself and had just crawled under the covers when I heard a knock on the door. I looked out the window and opened the door. "I couldn't sleep," was all she said as she entered my room and closed the door behind her. "I can't do what you want," I told her. "I know, but at least I can enjoy your warmth for one more night," she said. I pressed the spoon against her, and we spent the whole night hugging. With a kiss on the cheek, she left at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 9:30, we were already sitting on the bus on the way to the airport. "Steve, here's my email and cell number. No matter what happens, let's stay in touch," she said, touching my face. At the airport, Lori headed to Southwest Airlines, and I headed to Delta. I waved goodbye to her as we both headed back to reality. I had a lot to think about on the flight home. I expected to be back by noon and home no later than 3 o'clock, which gave me about an hour and a half before Carol got home from work. After I picked up my bags and the car, I headed home. I called my secretary, Jill, to see if there was anything urgent waiting for me at work. "Steve, everything went pretty smoothly since you did 90% of what you needed to do before you left. I just sat around painting my nails all week," she said, laughing. "However, Diana wanted to talk to you. If you'll allow me, let me put you on her line. Customer support, Diana here." "How can I help you?" she answered on her phone. "You can give me another ride in your car," I said in my normal voice. "Steve, why didn't you tell me you were going to California on a wine tour? I would have gone with you." "Diana, you know the place would have fallen apart if we weren't both here when we did," I said, trying to sound serious. "Besides, you'd probably want to play nurse for me, and I wouldn't have any fun." "You better not be having fun, if you know what I mean," she said, now a little angrily. "Don't worry, I was a good boy. Why did you want to talk to me?" "I had a surprise visit Tuesday morning when I got to work from your wife. She wanted to know where the hell you were. When I said I didn't know, she asked me point blank if I'd slept with you. Can you imagine?" she asked. "I hope you told her yes," I joked. "Are you crazy? You didn't see the way she looked at me." She was furious. However, I asked her how she liked the cruise, and she wanted to know how I knew that. I said you and I were discussing some things on a friendship level and that I knew you had problems with her. "Steve, we had a good conversation for about 45 minutes. I told her, like you, that you were playing with fire. Since she left, she's at least calmed down. She thinks you won't be coming home until Friday. Where did she get that information from? I have no idea. Just be careful. I think you're going to hell." I thanked her and told her I was sorry for all the trouble I had caused her and that I would see her in the morning if I was still alive. 10 minutes later, I pulled into my garage and was completely unpacked within half an hour. The house looked the same, at least she didn't destroy it while I was gone. I had just finished my second beer and was going through my email when I heard the garage door open. Damn, I was hoping for at least another half hour before she arrived. Carol burst into the kitchen. "Where the hell have you been? Why didn't you tell me you were leaving? Where have you been?" These were the only 3 questions I remember while she continued talking nonstop for about 5 minutes. "The wine valleys of California, and since you decided to take a vacation, I took one too," Carol said. "At least I told you where I was going," she shot back. "Carol, if something were to happen, how could I reach you if I needed to talk to you while you were on board? Could I reach you on your cell phone?" I asked. "You know our plan doesn't include the Caribbean. That's why I turned off my phone when I left." "What was it like being left in the dark?" I asked, looking at the nervous Carol. "Well, at least you're home now, and we can talk and stop all these stupid games. Are you hungry? Do you want to go eat or order something home? How was your cruise? Did you have fun?" I asked, trying to put her in an awkward position. "I know your sister was probably busy every night, but what about you?" "Steve, That's one hell of a question to ask your wife. Do you think I went on the cruise to cheat on you? I have no idea why you went on the cruise since you didn't want to talk to me about it. Hell, in theory, you could have fun every night. If you're going to keep that tone, I don't think I'll talk to you tonight. What other news? I said, still looking at her. To answer your question, no, I didn't cheat on you. Maybe I should ask you about these things, she replied. There aren't many island guys in California. I tried to soften the situation, and no, I didn't sleep with anyone. I'd love to say I slept with someone without actually having intimacy with her, but I don't think Carol would like that. Let's order pizza, open a bottle of wine, and talk. I agree. Order it while I change, she said, going upstairs. I wondered if she had moved back into our bedroom while I was gone. I'd probably find out later tonight. We talked about nonsense for the first hour, those little things people bring up when they're afraid to broach serious topics. After another 20 minutes, I started asking difficult questions. Did you figure out anything during the cruise with that airhead? I asked. Steve, I wish you wouldn't call her that. Yes, she's been married a couple of times, but she just hasn't met the right one yet. Carol, she had 2 husbands who loved her, and she cheated on both of them. And this is the woman you went with to decide if you want to stay married to me? Should I start packing now, or have you already packed everything? I said, trying to joke. Very funny. You know I didn't do anything like that, but I have to admit I was pretty mad when I came back and you weren't there. That was one of the reasons I left when I did. I thought it would give you a little more time to think without knowing exactly where I was. I guess it was pretty cruel, but you deserved it after you announced about the cruise. Steve, if I had told you about the cruise earlier, all we would have done was argue. We didn't argue after I found out, but it was only 2 days, and damn, you left before I could explain my reasons for wanting to go. Well, has any important revelation occurred to you? I asked. Only that I still love you and want to stay married to you. Well, I won't if this continues like it has for the last 2 years, I told a surprised Carol. I really think she expected me to cry and run into her arms, but those days are long gone. I want a wife, not a roommate. I can always hire a cook or maid to do what you do, but it's much harder to hire a wife. That's what I want, and I won't settle for anything less. Steve, I've been a good wife to you for 25 years. Now suddenly you start demanding that I change, or what? Are you going to throw me away like a used rag? Do you see how wrong that is? Listen, Carol, I'm making no demands on you other than that I don't want to be celibate anymore. If you're no longer interested in making love to me, I'll find someone who will be interested. I'm not going to give it up at any time, 50 years, I said, perhaps too loudly, trying to get my point across. We already discussed this. I can't do this 24 hours a day. I don't even want to, Carol said. I asked 3 times a week, and you said you'd think about it, but apparently, you thought I was kidding. Don't you miss the closeness we had, touching, hugging, curling up cozy in bed before sleep? I really miss it and want it back. But you started playing these stupid games. Carol, we both started playing games that only drove us apart to the point where I don't even know how to start getting closer again, I said sadly. Let's start from the beginning, she said, standing up and taking my hand. Breakfast was quick. I had to get back to work with only 2 hours of sleep. I looked a little tired. Looks like you need a vacation to unwind after your vacation, my secretary Jill joked. She asked if I needed a cup of coffee. There were a few things that required my immediate attention, but by midday, everything was back to normal. I see you're still alive, Diana said, walking past my office a little before 4 o'clock. Did you talk or just exchange insults last night? Both, I said with a weak smile. I guess we can't solve everything in one night. At least you guys started talking again, she said as she passed by. We talked and talked again over the next month. We solved some of our problems but ultimately realized we couldn't handle them all alone. Carol got the name David from a friend who had used his services many years ago and said he was quite good. On Tuesday at 3 o'clock, we found ourselves in his office. What can I do for you too? Was the first question from his lips. We both talked for almost half an hour about how we grew apart and the problems we had, including ones. Look, I can't solve your problems overnight, but if you're ready, we can work on the issues that are tearing you apart and see where it takes us. We both agreed and began the long road to recovery. We met twice a week. Mostly, we were together in sessions, but sometimes he wanted to see us separately to work on our individual problems. He didn't go around sharp corners. He told me that what I did in California was treason and that what Carol did on the cruise was also crossing the line. It turns out that my wife also found someone she liked on the cruise and, as she put it, went as far as second base with him more than once. She got a little annoyed when I said that I hadn't heard that expression since high school, but at least we tried. When he asked us where we saw ourselves in a year and in 5 years, we both had no idea, but it got us thinking. When he asked us how much intimacy is too little and how much is too much, we were still on opposite ends of the spectrum. Once a week was too little for me, and 3 times a week was too much for Carol. But we kept fighting. It took almost 5 months for us to achieve our first real breakthrough and another month to iron out the last 2 problems. David was happy with our results, and for the first time in a long time, Carol and I were happy too. Steve, when I received your letter about wanting to go on this cruise, I was thrilled, Lori told me, standing on the deck and looking out at the water. But when you said you were bringing your wife, it dampened my enthusiasm a little, she added, holding my hand. I told her I wanted to go alone, but she said no way after I had to tell her about our last trip together. I replied with a smile. She said you won't share the bed with me this time. Well, if she accidentally falls overboard, I say in advance that it's not my fault, Lori said, kissing me on the cheek. Steve, I can't leave you unattended for a minute, I heard my wife say from behind me as she walked up and kissed me on the lips. And this must be Lori, she said, holding out her hand. I've heard a lot about you, and you're just as charming as Steve said, she added, now looking me over. You know what a flatterer he is, Lori replied. Not really, but he's starting to learn if he knows what's best for him, she said with a smile. Well, shall we go out to dinner? Carol asked. I'm so glad you were moved to our table because I still have a couple of questions about the winery tour that I need to discuss, she said as the two of them laughed, looking at me when I blushed. I was dead meat, and I knew it. Our table in the dining room seated 10 people, and by the time the waiter brought our drinks, everyone was already seated. There were 4 couples, including us, and one good-looking young guy who sat next to Lori. I nudged her with my elbow and gave a thumbs up, to which she hit me in the arm. Introductions were the order of the day as each couple told everyone their names and where they were from. I imagined us as Steve and Diane Moore from the sunny state of Florida as I looked at Lori, who was next in line. That's right, my wife is Diana, not Carol. You see, we finally solved our problems with David's help, just not in the way we both planned, I said. It turned out that we were both on different pages in our lives. Carol had reached a point where she wanted to relax and let life take its course, as long as it didn't interfere with her peaceful lifestyle. She began to enjoy her freedom and didn't want anyone to dictate what she should or shouldn't do, including me. She was more than happy with intimacy every now and then to relieve the tension, but it was overkill when she wasn't really in the mood to even please me. We discussed where we wanted to be in 1 and 5 years and discovered that we weren't even on the same planet. We decided to separate, and now we get along better than when we were together. Carol and I sold our house and divided everything equally. We used the same lawyer, and within 3 months, everything was completed, and we were both much happier. She wanted to do it again for old time's sake, but I told her that while I would love to, I was in a relationship and couldn't cheat on Diana any more than I could cheat on her. You see, a week after our last session, I arrived at Diana's doorstep. We talked and had dinner, but she told me that she would never date anyone from work. I solved this problem by taking days off from my 8 weeks of vacation, cashing out my 401k, and investing in a thriving travel agency. We started dating the next day. I rented an apartment not far from work with the option of renting on a monthly basis, but after 3 months, I moved in with Diana. She dated 2 men after her husband's death, but neither of them lived up to her expectations. Looks like her husband was more than just good in bed. After our 3rd date, with her driving her car, we stopped at her house. Steve, I'm not Carol, and I never will be. I don't like games, and if you have a problem with me, I expect you to tell me so we can figure it out. You and your wife have ruined your marriage, and if we are going to move forward, I will not tolerate what you did. I expect honesty, loyalty, and you to put my needs first, and I will do the same for you. If you can't handle it, there is no point in wasting our time on something that has no chance of success, Diana said. Okay, Diana, tell me how you really feel. Don't beat around the bush. Tell me straight. I can handle it, I said with a stupid smile on my face as I grabbed and kissed her. That was nice, I said, stroking her arm as we lay next to each other. Nice? Nice, she repeated. Didn't I rock your world? I thought you'd say it was bloody wonderful, the best thing ever, she said, now leaning on her elbow and looking at me. Baby, it doesn't matter if you make my eyes bug out of my head or if we make tender love and then cuddle for the rest of the night. What matters is that we're together, I told her. After 2 months, she wanted to make sure we were exclusive. 3 months later, I moved in with her, and 6 months later, we got married in a small ceremony with just friends and family. Her daughter was her maid of honor, and I had the 2 best people, my sons, by my side. During the planning, she asked if I wanted to invite my ex, but I told her that it was our day. Although we were on good terms, Carol was my past, and she was my future. All she said was, "Good answer." Since we never got around to taking a formal vacation, I organized a cruise for just the 2 of us. I emailed Lori and asked if she was interested, and she immediately replied, yes. When I finally told Lori I was bringing my new wife, although she was more than a little disappointed, she still wanted to meet us. She said, "I just need to meet the woman who grabbed you so quickly after you became available." We had a great time. Lori never contacted the young guy at our table, but she did mention someone in Denver who was more than interested in her. He's sweet and all, but he wants to make an honest woman out of me, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. Let me give you some friendly advice, Diana said, leaning over and whispering to Lori. If it's worth it, grab it ASAP. If not, it might not be available when you're ready, she said with a big smile. This story reminds us that even long years of marriage can break down due to reticence and deception. It is important not only to maintain trust, but also to be honest with each other in order to overcome difficulties together. After all, as the saying goes, the truth always comes to the surface and it is up to us to deal with its consequences. Remember, better the bitter truth than sweet lies. Write your opinions and stories in the comments. See you for more videos.
This story is titled, "My Sister-in-Law Falsely Accused Me of Having an Affair with Her and Tried to Destroy My Marriage and My Reputation, so I made it my mission to destroy her, and I did." Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. Never thought I'd be writing this, but my life's been wrecked by someone who had no business messing with me in the first place. My sister-in-law is 24. To give you some context, I'm 28 male, married to my wife 25 female, and we've been together for about 5 years, married for 2. My wife is my rock. She's kind, thoughtful, and the type of person who'd give you her last dollar if you needed it. She's the kind of person you'd be lucky to have by your side. And honestly, up until recently, I thought we had a pretty solid life together. We live in a small town where everyone knows everyone. I run a business here, and while it's not some big corporate empire, it's successful enough that people recognize my name. In a town like this, reputation matters, and I've worked hard to build mine. People trust me. They know I'm someone who keeps his word. That's what makes this whole mess with Esil so infuriating. She's been trying to tear me down with lies. And for what? Attention? Jealousy? I still don't fully understand her motives, but the damage she's tried to do is unreal. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. My wife and her sister were never particularly close, which seemed odd to me at first. You'd think 2 siblings just a couple of years apart would have a good bond, but that wasn't the case. My wife explained early on that Esil had always been a bit difficult. She said Sil had a habit of making everything about her, even when it didn't need to be. In school, she would spread rumors about my wife to get attention. Things like, oh, she doesn't care about anyone but herself. Or, she bullied me for getting a better grade. It was like SIL couldn't stand seeing my wife succeed or be happy. My wife chalked it up to jealousy and tried not to let it bother her. At first, I didn't think much of it. SIL was her family, not mine, and I figured as long as she wasn't causing problems for me, it wasn't my business. But I started noticing things early on, little behaviors that made me uncomfortable. When my wife and I were still dating, SIL had this weird habit of inserting herself into our relationship. If my wife and I were out together, SEL would somehow coincidentally run into us. We'd be at a small cafe and she'd suddenly appear saying, "Oh, I didn't know you'd be here. Mind if I join?" It happened enough times that it stopped feeling like a coincidence. And then there were the texts. She'd send me these random messages. Nothing too inappropriate, but just weird. Things like, "You're such a great guy. My sister's lucky to have you." Or, "I hope you're doing well. Let me know if you ever need anything." At first, I thought she was just being friendly, but it felt off. Why was she texting me and not her sister? I'd usually ignore her messages, and that's when I noticed she'd delete them. I'd see the notification on my phone, but when I went back to check later, the message would be gone. It wasn't a one-time thing either. It happened enough to make me think she was trying to cover her tracks. I told my wife about the texts once, but she brushed it off, saying, "That's just how she is. She's always trying to insert herself into everything. Just ignore her." So I did. I ignored her texts, ignored her weird comments, and tried to focus on my relationship with my wife. Still, I kept my distance from SIL whenever possible. When my wife and I got engaged, SIL's behavior only got worse. It felt like she was always trying to create drama or make herself the center of attention. She'd make snarky comments like, "Oh, I can't believe you're settling down so young," or, "I hope you're ready for married life. It's not as easy as it looks." My wife would roll her eyes and tell me not to let it bother me, but it was clear that SIL wasn't exactly thrilled about our relationship. She'd even go out of her way to interrupt moments between us, like showing up at my house uninvited when I was planning a quiet evening with my fiancé. My wife saw it as her sister being clingy, but to me, it felt like something more. At one point, I started to wonder if SIL was jealous of my wife. It wasn't just our relationship she seemed to envy, it was everything about her. My wife has always been hardworking and independent, and SIL, well, she's kind of the opposite. She's the type of person who expects the world to cater to her, and when it doesn't, she acts like she's been wronged. My wife told me stories about how SIL would throw tantrums as a kid whenever my wife got something she wanted, like a new toy or praise from their parents. It was like she couldn't stand being outshined. Still, I didn't think it would escalate to anything serious. I thought Sil was just one of those people who always needed to feel important. Annoying, sure, but harmless. I couldn't have been more wrong. Fast forward to our wedding day. My wife and I were so excited to finally tie the knot, but of course SEL found a way to make it about her. She showed up in this bright, flashy dress that almost looked like a wedding gown. People even commented on it, asking if she'd misunderstood the dress code. My wife tried to laugh it off, but I could tell it bothered her. And that wasn't the only thing. During the reception, SIL kept trying to monopolize my time. She'd pull me aside to talk about random things, like her new job or her plans for the future. At one point, she even joked, "You better not forget about me now that you're married." It felt so out of place, but I just smiled and walked away. After the wedding, things calmed down for a while. SEL wasn't as involved in our lives, and I thought maybe she'd finally backed off. My wife and I settled into married life, and everything was great. We were happy, building our home together, and focusing on our future. SIL was still in the background, but she wasn't causing any problems. Or so I thought. I should have trusted my instincts. All those little red flags I ignored, they were just the beginning. I had no idea how far SIL was willing to go to involve herself into our lives and try to tear us apart. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have put up boundaries a lot sooner. But hindsight's 2020, right? What I didn't realize was that SIL wasn't done with us. Far from it. She was just biding her time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to cause chaos. And when that opportunity came, she didn't hold back. When SIL moved into our home, I was already on edge. I didn't say anything outright to my wife because I didn't want to come off as unwelcoming or paranoid. My wife was already feeling bad for her sister. SEL had just gone through a nasty breakup, and she was clearly in a bad place emotionally. My wife, being the saint that she is, wanted to help her out, so she didn't think twice about offering SIL a room. For the first week or so, SEL kept a low profile. She mostly stayed in the guest room or watched TV in the living room, but it didn't take long for her true colors to come out. She had this way of always inserting herself where she didn't belong, like she was constantly trying to prove that she mattered more than she did. I should have said something sooner, but I didn't want to rock the boat. The tension started with small things. SIL would never give us space as a couple. If my wife and I were sitting together on the couch, she'd plop down right between us and start talking like we were all best friends. If we were having a quiet dinner, she'd make some excuse to sit down with us and tell us all about her day, even though we never asked. My wife brushed it off as SIL just being a little needy, but I knew it was more than that. It wasn't normal behavior, and it wasn't just us. SIL had this way of making herself the center of attention whenever we had guests over. I sometimes host dinners for friends from my business, either casual hangouts or networking events, and SIL would always manage to ruin the vibe. She'd come downstairs, dressed to the nines, and act like she was the star of the show. She'd laugh too loudly at jokes, interrupt conversations to talk about herself, and worst of all, she'd start asking my friends for their phone numbers. I remember one night in particular when she pulled that stunt. I'd invited 3 friends over, guys I've known for years and worked closely with. We were sitting in the dining room, having a good time, when SIL suddenly walked in and made a huge scene about accidentally spilling a drink on herself. She ran to the table with this over-the-top apology, acting like she was embarrassed, but clearly enjoying the attention. Then she sat down with us uninvited, started flirting with one of my friends, and even asked for his number in case she needed career advice. After the guests left, I pulled her and told her straight up, "This is my home and my business relationships. If you keep acting like this, you're going to have to leave." She immediately started crying, saying she didn't mean it, that she was just trying to fit in. My wife heard the commotion and came to see what was going on. I didn't want to upset her, so I downplayed it and let SEL off with a warning, but I was done giving her the benefit of the doubt. Then there were the messages. Sil had been texting me more often, and now it was getting harder to ignore. She wasn't just sending casual, "hope you're doing well" texts anymore. She started saying things like, "You're so easy to talk to," or, "I feel like you understand me better than anyone else." It was direct enough to be uncomfortable, but vague enough that she could claim she didn't mean anything by it if I called her out. But here's the kicker. She'd delete the messages right after sending them. Again. She must have thought she was being clever. But I wasn't stupid. It pissed me off, but I thought she would get bored if I ignored her and moved on. She didn't. One night, I was working late in my home office. My wife had already gone to bed, and I decided to take a break and grab something to eat. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light, and there she was, standing by the fridge like she'd been waiting for me. I ignored her and opened the pantry, but then I felt her hand brush my arm. I turned around, and there she was, standing way too close, with this look on her face that made my skin crawl. "You work so hard," she said, her voice low and weirdly soft. "I wish I could help take care of you." I stepped back immediately, but she moved closer. She reached out and tried to touch my chest. That was it. I grabbed her wrist firmly, very angry, and barely containing myself. "This is enough. You're way out of line." She froze, probably shocked that I wasn't just letting her get away with it. I wasn't done. "I've ignored your messages, your stunts, and your disrespect in my own home. But this crosses the line. You're out of this house by tomorrow morning, and I'm telling your sister everything." Her eyes went wide and she started stammering. "I didn't mean..." But I cut her off. "Number, don't even try to play the victim here. Pack your stuff. You're leaving." She tried to apologize, saying she was just lonely and didn't mean to make me uncomfortable. But I wasn't buying it. I walked away without saying another word, went back to my office and locked the door. I stayed up half the night, running through everything in my head. Part of me wanted to wake my wife up and tell her everything right then and there, but I decided to wait till the morning. I needed to make sure SEL was out of the house first. The next morning, I went to work as usual, knowing I'd deal with the situation once I got home. I needed time to tell my wife everything clearly and make sure SEL was out for good. I came home from work. I was in my office catching up on some work when I heard my wife's phone ring in the other room. It wasn't unusual for her to get calls from her family, so I didn't think much of it, until I heard her voice get louder. She was saying, "Wait, what? That doesn't even make sense." I stopped what I was doing, walked into the living room, and saw her pacing back and forth, looking pale. I asked her what was going on, and she waved me off, mouthing, "It's SIL." I sat down, listening to her side of the conversation, saying something about needing to confess and feeling guilty. My wife was clearly trying to make sense of whatever SIL was saying, but her expression kept getting more confused and angry. Then she stopped pacing, looked at me and said, "I think you need to talk to her." She put the phone on speaker, and that's when I heard Sil's voice clearly. "I can't keep this secret anymore. she was sobbing. It's been eating me alive, and I feel like I need to tell you the truth before it ruins me completely. What are you talking about? My wife asked, her tone sharp. Sil took a deep breath and said it. Your husband and I had an affair when I was staying with you. He pursued me, and I was weak after my breakup. I gave in, but I regret it so much. I'm so sorry. I froze. I don't think I've ever been that angry in my entire life. It wasn't just the lie. It was how casual and manipulative she sounded, like she was confessing something noble instead of blatantly fabricating the most insane story. Are you serious right now? I finally said. The phone went quiet for a second, and then Sil doubled down. You can deny it all you want, but you know it's true. I just hope you can admit it to yourself one day. My wife hung up on her. For a second, neither of us said anything. I was fuming, pacing the room, trying to wrap my head around what just happened. Then, my wife spoke. She's lying, she said firmly. This doesn't even make sense. I looked at her surprised. You believe me? Of course I believe you, she said, sitting down next to me. She's been pulling crap like this for years. She used to lie about me all the time when we were kids, making up stories to get attention. I thought she'd grown out of it, but clearly not. Even though she said she believed me, I could tell it hurt her. Her own sister had just accused her husband of the worst thing imaginable. I wanted to fix it immediately, to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Sil was lying. Let me show you everything, I said. I pulled out my phone, opened up my messages, and scrolled through them. There's nothing here because nothing ever happened. She's lying. My wife looked at the screen, nodding. I know, but she's not going to stop. She wants attention, and she's willing to destroy us to get it. If Sil's accusation wasn't enough, she decided to go nuclear. A few days after her confession, my wife's parents called. They weren't just asking questions. They were demanding answers. We've heard everything, my father-in-law said. You need to leave that man. He's clearly controlling you, and now he's cheated on you with your own sister? This isn't love, honey. My wife tried to defend me. Dad, it's not true. She's lying. But they didn't believe her. Sil had apparently gone to them, crying about how she'd felt trapped in the situation. She even claimed I was abusive, saying I would shout at her all the time and control what everyone in the house ate. It was absolutely ridiculous. Burned toast? He ruined the food on purpose to intimidate us. Grocery shopping? He controlled what we ate to show his dominance. Shouting down the stairs to find my phone? He yelled constantly, and we were all scared of him. It was laughable if it wasn't so infuriating. They started calling and texting my wife nonstop, pressuring her to leave me. They even went as far as calling my parents to warn them about what kind of person I supposedly was. That night, my wife and I sat down together and called my parents. We explained everything. The accusations, Sil's behavior, the messages she'd been sending. My parents were furious, but not at me. They knew Sil was lying and supported us 100%. My dad even said, if her parents want to believe that nonsense, that's on them. But you don't need to justify yourself to anyone. Once Sil realized her lies weren't tearing my marriage apart, she shifted her focus. It wasn't enough for her to make things awkward at home. Now she wanted to go after my reputation, starting with my work. She knew I valued my business and the relationships I'd built in the community, so she went for the jugular. At first, it was subtle. One of my business friends, Mark, called me out of the blue, sounding confused. Hey man, I wanted to check in with you. I ran into your sister-in-law at the coffee shop earlier today, and she said some interesting things about you. Immediately, my stomach dropped. What kind of things? I asked, already bracing for the worst. Mark hesitated before continuing. She was saying you're controlling at home and that things aren't good between you and your wife. She didn't outright say anything about cheating, but she hinted at some issues. I figured it didn't sound like you, so I wanted to ask. I was furious, but managed to keep my voice calm. Thanks for letting me know, Mark. It's all lies. She's been stirring up trouble because she's upset about being asked to leave our house. None of it's true. Mark immediately had my back. I thought it sounded off. Don't worry, I won't entertain it. But I'd keep an eye on her. She seems like she's trying to start something. I thanked him, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Sil had already caused enough chaos within my family, and now she was trying to drag my professional life into it. She was calculating, and she knew how important these relationships were to me. The final straw came when one of my biggest clients, Dave, pulled me aside after a meeting. Look, I don't want to overstep, he started, but someone's been saying things about you. I don't know what's going on, but I thought you should know. I asked him to explain, and he told me Sil had contacted him directly. She'd told him I was under a lot of stress and hinted that I wasn't managing my business well. She said she was concerned about you, but honestly, It felt like she was trying to undermine you, Dave said. It didn't sit right with me. That was it. I'd had enough. Sayal wasn't just attacking me personally. She was coming after my livelihood. She thought she could destroy everything I'd worked for because she wasn't getting the attention or control she wanted. I sat down with my wife that night and told her everything. She's not just lying to hurt me, I said. She's trying to destroy my reputation. She's been talking to my friends and even my clients, spreading rumors and twisting the truth. I can't let her keep doing this. My wife nodded, her face hard with determination. We need to stop her. She's crossed too many lines. Together, we started gathering more evidence. I reached out to Mark and Dave, asking if they'd be willing to document their conversations with Esil. They agreed. They didn't want to see her get away with this any more than I did. I hired someone to retrieve the deleted messages Esiel had sent me. Sure enough, the texts painted a clear picture. She'd been sending me messages for months, trying to get closer to me, and deleting them when I didn't reply. There was nothing explicit, but it was enough to show her intentions. The security footage from the night in the kitchen was also included in the evidence. While it didn't show her exact words, it clearly demonstrated her invasive behavior and my attempt to shut it down. It backed up my timeline and refuted any claims she might make about my actions being inappropriate. Finally, my wife and I started digging into SIL's history. My wife talked to old friends, neighbors, even some extended family. The stories we uncovered were shocking. SIL had been lying to get attention for years, claiming she was bullied when she wasn't, faking illnesses, and even spreading rumors about people just to make herself look better. I called my lawyer the next morning and explained everything that had happened. I told him about SIL's false accusations, her messages, and her attempts to damage my professional relationships. My lawyer listened carefully and then laid out my options. What she's doing qualifies as defamation, he explained. If you have evidence of her lies and the harm they've caused, we can build a strong case. The first step would be to send her a cease and desist letter. If she doesn't stop, we'll file a lawsuit. I agreed immediately. My lawyer drafted a detailed cease and desist letter, outlining every instance of SIL's false claims and warning her that further actions would lead to legal consequences. The letter also demanded that she retract her statements to anyone she'd contacted. A week after SIL received the letter, I filed a defamation lawsuit. My lawyer told me it was a necessary step, not just to protect my business, but also to send a message that her behavior wouldn't be tolerated. When SIL found out about the lawsuit, she panicked. She called my wife, crying and begging her to make me stop. She claimed she never meant to hurt anyone and was just worried about our marriage. My wife didn't buy it. You're not worried about us, she told Esil coldly. You're trying to destroy us, and now you're facing the consequences. After that, Sil went quiet, at least for a little while. She stopped contacting my colleagues and clients, probably because she realized I wasn't bluffing. But it can't be undone. After months of stress, lies, and fighting to clear my name, the court finally ruled in my favor. SIL was found guilty of defamation and harassment. She was ordered to pay damages, issue formal retractions to the people she'd lied to, and slapped with a restraining order. For the first time in what felt like forever, my wife and I could breathe. But even though the legal battle was over, the fallout wasn't. SIL's lies had left cracks in my wife's relationship with her parents that couldn't easily be repaired. And honestly, I was done giving them the benefit of the doubt. It started almost immediately after SEL was served with the lawsuit. My wife's phone lit up with calls and messages from her parents. At first, they tried to play the sympathetic card, saying things like, "This is just a misunderstanding," or "She didn't mean any harm." But when we didn't respond, their tone quickly changed. But then it quickly became clear they weren't ready to let go of their skewed narrative. Instead of accepting the truth, they decided to shift the blame directly onto me. One evening, my father-in-law called while we were having dinner. My wife sighed and reluctantly answered, putting him on speakerphone so I could hear. "Sweetheart," he began, his voice filled with forced patience, "I just don't understand why you two are going through with this. This is family. You don't take family to court. Do you know what this is doing to all of us?" My wife kept her tone calm, but I could see the frustration on her face. "Dad, do you know what she did to us? She lied about my husband, tried to ruin his reputation, and spread disgusting rumors. Why should we let her get away with that?" "Because it's not worth tearing the family apart," he snapped. "You two are blowing this out of proportion. You should just talk it out like adults and move on. This lawsuit is going to destroy our family." I finally spoke up. With all due respect, the family was already falling apart the moment you chose to believe Esil's lies instead of us. She's the one who caused this mess, not us. And the damage she's done to my life and my career, isn't something I can just move on from. My father-in-law sighed heavily, clearly irritated. You're being dramatic. She made a mistake, but dragging this out in court is only going to make things worse. Can't you see what this is doing to your wife? She doesn't need this stress. My wife cut in before I could respond. No, Dad. What I don't need is you and Mom constantly defending her. She's a grown woman who made her choices. We're done letting her ruin our lives. This case is happening, whether you like it or not. A few days later, my mother-in-law called. Her tone was softer than her husband's, but the manipulation was the same. She began, "Can't we just sit down as a family and work this out? We've always been able to talk things through before. Why does this have to go to court?" "Because talking hasn't worked," my wife said firmly. "Every time we try to reason with her, she lies or twists the truth. We've given her chance after chance, and all she's done is double down on her lies. She's left us no choice." "But think about what this is doing to the family," her mom said, her voice trembling. "Your sister is devastated. She's made some bad decisions, but she's still your sister. Do you really want to be the reason this family falls apart?" I could see my wife's frustration bubbling over. "Mom, the family fell apart the second you and Dad believed her over me. You let her lies drive a wedge between us, and now you're blaming me and my husband for standing up for ourselves? How is that fair?" Her mom started to cry. "We just want things to go back to the way they were. Can't you see how much this is hurting everyone?" "No, Mom," my wife said, her voice sharp. "You want things to go back to the way they were because it's easier for you? It's easier to blame us than to admit you were wrong about her. But that's not happening. If you can't support us, then stop calling." When the guilt trips didn't work, my in-laws switched to threats. They started warning us about what would happen if we didn't drop the case. "Do you know how this will look to everyone?" my father-in-law said during one heated phone call. "People in town will start to think you're the problem, not her. Who takes their own sister-in-law to court? It's going to make your husband look petty and vindictive." I couldn't stay silent. "The only person who looks bad here is SEL, I said. "I have evidence proving she lied, harassed, and if someone is about to be judged, it's your daughter." "But think about how this will affect your wife," he fired back. "Do you really want to make her choose between her family and you?" My wife stepped in. "Dad, you've already put me in that position, and I'm choosing my husband because he's the only one who's been honest and supportive through all of this. If you're forcing me to pick sides, then you're not the family I thought you were." The final straw came when my in-laws showed up at our house uninvited. My wife and I were sitting in the living room when we heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find her parents standing there, looking determined. "We need to talk," her mom said, pushing past me into the house. "No, we don't," I said firmly. "We've made our position clear." My wife stood up, crossing her arms. "What are you doing here?" Her dad wasted no time. "We're here to talk some sense into you. This lawsuit has gone too far, and we're not leaving until you agree to drop it." My wife laughed bitterly. "You think you can just barge in here and tell me what to do? After everything you've said and done, you're lucky I'm even letting you in the door." Her mom's voice broke. "Please, sweetheart. She's your sister. She's hurting." "Hurting?" my wife interrupted, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea how much we've been hurting? She accused my husband of having an affair. She tried to ruin his business. She lied to everyone we know, and you two let her. And now you want to stand here and guilt me into protecting her? Number absolutely not." I stepped in. "This conversation is over. You can either leave or we'll call the police." They finally left, but everything was already done. That was the moment we decided to go completely no contact. With my sister-in-law and her parents out of our lives, we finally found peace. The court case went forward, and SIL was ordered to pay for all the losses I incurred with my clients, around $83,000. We also got a restraining order against her. After that, everyone started giving her the silent treatment. Nobody wanted to talk to her. Eventually, she had to move away and live alone. Some people might say I was cruel, but honestly, that's what happens when you mess with me. This story is titled, "My Wife Cheated with Her Boss, and My Daughters Helped Hide It. So I Took My Nuclear Revenge." Hey everyone! I spend so much time finding these stories for you. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world and helps keep this journey going strong. Let's grow together. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "I'm not even sure why I'm writing this. Maybe to vent, maybe to get it out of my system, maybe to make sense of it all, because right now, my life feels like it's been ripped to shreds and I can barely keep it together. I just need to tell someone, even if it's strangers on the internet. For almost 30 years, I thought I had the kind of life most people dream about. I married my wife, Jane, when we were young. She was 20, I was 22. We were broke as hell back then, but we were happy. We built a life together from scratch. Raised two daughters, Alice and Maddie. They were everything to me, my pride and joy. Alice, my oldest, is 26. She's always been the overachiever. Valedictorian in high school, graduated top of her class in college, and now she's getting married this fall to her longtime boyfriend. Maddie is 24, my youngest. She's always been the more carefree one. She's sweet, always quick to smile, and she's been really close to me since she was little. I'd always thought I had a great relationship with both of them. Jane and I had a good marriage, or at least that's what I thought. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like every couple. Financial struggles when the kids were young, arguments here and there, health scares. But through it all, we stuck together. I thought we were a team. I really believed we'd grow old together, that we'd be that old couple sitting on the porch, laughing about the crazy days when we were young. I loved her with everything I had. Last week, everything came crashing down. It was just a regular weekday. Jane told me she was going out for dinner with Alice and Maddie. They do this pretty regularly, every couple of weeks. Girls' dinner, they call it. It's their time to catch up, laugh, and share things they don't want to talk about with me. I never minded. In fact, I loved that they were close. It made me proud as a husband and father, like I'd done something right in raising a family that loved each other so much. That night, Jane was getting ready upstairs. I was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through the news on my phone. I remember it so clearly. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't unusual. She gets messages from the girls all the time, especially when they're organizing plans. Without thinking, I picked it up. I'm not proud of what I did next. I didn't have any reason to be suspicious. But for some reason, I opened the message. It was from an unsaved number. Can't wait to see you tonight. I froze. My first reaction was confusion. This couldn't be right. It had to be a mistake, or maybe it wasn't what it looked like. I stared at the message for what felt like forever, my mind racing. Finally, I tapped on the thread to see the rest of the conversation. What I found destroyed me. The messages weren't long, but they didn't have to be. They were enough to tell me exactly what was going on. The texts were from her boss. They were meeting for dinner, and it was obvious this wasn't a business dinner. The tone of the messages was flirty, affectionate. There were texts from earlier that week. I miss you. Once a week isn't enough. Jane had replied, I miss you too. My stomach turned. My heart started racing. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the phone. This was my wife. The woman I'd built my life with, the mother of my children. She was having an affair. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to march upstairs and confront her right then and there. But I couldn't. I was in shock, trying to process what I'd just seen. I needed more information. I needed to be absolutely sure. A few minutes later, Jane came downstairs. She was dressed up, looking beautiful as always. She smiled at me, kissed me on the cheek, and said, Don't wait up, okay? Her voice was so casual, so warm, like everything was normal. I don't know how I kept it together, but I managed to say, Have fun with the girls. As soon as she walked out the door, I grabbed her phone and turned on location sharing. I'd never done anything like that before. I'd never felt the need to spy on her or anyone else. But in that moment, I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. I sat there for a while, staring at my own phone, waiting for her location to update. When it finally did, my heart sank even further. She wasn't heading to the restaurant where she and the girls usually met. She was going somewhere else, a place we'd been to many times as a family. I texted Alice and Maddie, What time are you meeting Mom for dinner? Both of them responded almost immediately. Alice said, 7 o'clock, can't wait to see her. Maddie said something similar. They were lying. My own daughters were lying to me. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. But at that moment I knew. Jane wasn't the only one betraying me. My daughters were part of it too. I waited a little longer, watching Jane's location. She arrived at the restaurant. I grabbed my car keys and drove there, my heart pounding the whole way. When I got there, I parked outside and looked through the window. It didn't take long to find her. She was sitting at a table near the back with her boss. They were holding hands, laughing, completely unaware that I was watching them. It felt like a knife in my chest. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of them. I don't even know why I did it. Maybe to prove to myself that it was real, that I wasn't imagining things. Then I drove away. As I sat in my car, staring at the picture of my wife with another man, I felt a wave of emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to face her, how to confront her. So, I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened our family group chat and sent the picture. Just the picture, with a simple caption. Period. Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner. Then I turned off my phone and drove to my brother's house. I didn't want to deal with the fallout yet. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. That night, I lay awake in my brother's guest room, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had fallen apart so quickly. I'd always thought of myself as a good husband, a good father, but now I wasn't so sure. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, felt like a lie. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. After I sent that photo in the family group chat and turned off my phone, I drove aimlessly for a while before finally pulling into my brother's driveway. It was late, but he let me in without asking too many questions. He could tell something was wrong, though. I guess it was written all over my face. I didn't tell him the full story then. I just said I needed a place to crash for the night. He offered me a beer, but I wasn't in the mood. I just wanted to be alone. I spent the night on his couch, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My mind was racing, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. I kept replaying the moment I saw them together in the restaurant. The way Jane smiled at her boss, the way they leaned in close to each other, holding hands like two teenagers in love. It made me sick. How long had this been going on? How had I been so blind? And then there was Alice and Maddie. The way they lied to me so casually, like it was nothing. I raised them to be honest, to have integrity. Yet, here they were, helping their mother cover up an affair. It felt like a betrayal on a completely different level. The next morning, I finally turned my phone back on. It immediately lit up with notifications. Texts, missed calls, voicemails. Jane had called me dozens of times. Alice and Maddie had texted me as well. I didn't have the strength to read everything at once, so I skimmed through. Jane's messages were what I expected. Please call me. I can explain. It's not what you think. We need to talk. I didn't listen to her voicemails. I couldn't bring myself to hear her voice. I knew it would just make me angrier. Maddie's messages hit differently. She sent me wall after wall of texts, apologizing profusely. Dad, I'm so sorry. I never should have lied to you. I hate myself for what I did. Please don't hate me. Can we please talk? I'm so scared I've ruined everything. She even had her boyfriend text me. Hey, this is Josh. Maddie's really upset and having a panic attack. She's scared you'll never forgive her. Please call her. I didn't reply to her either. I didn't know what to say. Alice, on the other hand, was a different story. Her text was short and cold. Dad, I'm sorry you found out this way, but I think you're overreacting. Don't throw away a good marriage over one mistake. Overreacting? One mistake? My blood boiled. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a full-blown betrayal, not only by Jane, but by Alice and Maddie too. They lied to me. They helped their mother cover up something that completely shattered our family. I couldn't help but think about all the times they must have lied to my face. Every time I asked about their plans and they told me they were going to dinner, knowing full well what Jane was really doing. Every time they smiled at me, acting like everything was normal, all the while hiding the truth. I spent most of the day stewing in my own anger and heartbreak. My brother tried to talk to me, but I wasn't ready to open up yet. I needed time to sort through my thoughts. By the afternoon, I decided I couldn't let this go without saying something. I started by texting Maddie. I kept it short. Period. Maddie, I love you, but what you've done has hurt me deeply. I need space to figure things out. She replied almost instantly. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself for this. I love you so much. I didn't respond. Then I texted Alice. Period. Alice, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal from my entire family. Please don't contact me until I'm ready to talk. She didn't reply, but I know she must have shown Jane because Jane started texting me again shortly after. Don't take this out on the girls. They were just trying to protect me. They didn't mean to hurt you. I ignored her. I wasn't interested in excuses. Later that evening, I finally told my brother the full story. I showed him the messages, the photo, everything. He was furious on my behalf. You need to cut them all off, he said. They clearly don't respect you. Why should you keep them in your life? His words hit me hard. Because deep down, I knew he was right. But cutting off my daughters? That was a step I wasn't sure I could take. That night, I started thinking about the next steps. I knew my marriage to Jane was over. There was no coming back from this. I didn't even want to try. But what about Alice and Maddie? Could I ever trust them again? Could I ever look at them the same way, knowing what they did? I decided I needed time. Time to think, time to process, time to figure out how to move forward. But one thing was certain. My life as I knew it was over. The fallout didn't just hit like a bomb. It lingered. A slow, suffocating burn. By the time I got back to my brother's place that evening, I wasn't angry anymore. I was numb. Every emotion I had felt earlier, the rage, the disbelief, the heartbreak, had given way to a dull, crushing weight in my chest. It was like the life I had built, the one I thought was rock solid, was crumbling, and all I could do was watch. The first thing I noticed when I turned on my phone was the silence. For all the notifications and missed calls earlier in the day, now there was nothing new. No more frantic texts from Maddie, no follow-ups from Alice, no voice messages from Jane. It was like they realized I wasn't going to respond and gave up. Or maybe they were regrouping. Who knows? Either way, the quiet was unsettling. The silence gave me time to think, and that wasn't a good thing. When the anger was gone, all that was left was the hurt. The questions that kept swirling in my head like a tornado. How long had this been going on? How many times had Jane lied to my face? Did Alice and Maddie ever feel guilty about what they were doing? Or was this all just normal for them, betraying their father to protect their mother? I sat down with my brother that night and laid it all out for him. He didn't say much while I was talking, just listened. I told him about finding the texts on Jane's phone, the lies from Alice and Maddie, the picture I took of Jane with her boss at the restaurant, and the family group chat bomb I dropped before disappearing. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "That's messed up," he said. "I don't even know where to start. I mean, I always thought Jane was a little, too polished, but I didn't think she'd do something like this. And the girls? Man, I don't know. It's low." It was a relief to hear someone else say it out loud, to confirm that I wasn't overreacting or losing my mind. But it didn't make it any easier. My brother was furious on my behalf, which helped in the moment. But the truth was, I didn't need his anger. I had plenty of my own. What I needed was clarity, a way forward. I had none. The next morning, I decided to stop wallowing and start doing something. The first step was getting my finances in order. I couldn't think about the emotional side of things if I didn't protect myself first. I spent most of the day canceling joint accounts, moving money into a separate account Jane couldn't touch, and locking down anything that might be at risk during the divorce. I wasn't going to let her use my grief as an opportunity to blindside me. But it wasn't just about Jane. As I went through my accounts, I couldn't stop thinking about all the money I had spent, or was planning to spend, on Alice's wedding. Tens of thousands of dollars gone. All for a daughter who had looked me in the eye and lied, who had helped her mother betray me. The thought made me sick. I made a mental note to talk to my lawyer about it. Maybe I couldn't get that money back, but I sure as hell wasn't going to pay another cent. By the afternoon, I was ready to take the next step. I called a lawyer. Well, several lawyers, actually. My brother had recommended I meet with a few before choosing one, so I spent the rest of the day sitting in offices, retelling the story to strangers who were trying very hard to act professional while clearly judging the situation. By the end of the day, I had picked someone. She was tough, smart, and most importantly, aggressive. I told her I wanted this to be as clean and quick as possible, but I also wanted to make sure Jane didn't walk away with anything she didn't deserve. The lawyer reassured me, saying she'd handled plenty of cases like this before. That didn't make me feel any better, but at least I felt like I was in good hands. That night, as I sat alone in my brother's guest room, I started to think about what I wanted to say to Jane. I hadn't confronted her yet. I'd been avoiding it, partly because I didn't trust myself to stay calm, and partly because I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of explaining herself. What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? But I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. At some point, I'd have to face her, and when I did, I wanted to be ready. I didn't want to get sucked into her excuses or her tears. I needed to stay focused, to remind myself why I was doing this. I wrote down everything I wanted to say, every question I wanted to ask, every point I wanted to make. I didn't know if I'd actually use it, but writing it down helped. It made me feel like I had some control, like I wasn't just a victim in all of this. The hardest part, though, was thinking about Alice and Maddie. I hadn't spoken to them since sending those texts, and I didn't know if I could. How do you talk to your daughters after finding out they've been lying to you for months? How do you even begin to rebuild that trust? I wanted to believe that Maddie's apologies were sincere, that she was truly sorry for what she'd done. But how could I trust that? How could I trust anything she said after what I'd discovered? And Alice, her cold, dismissive response had shattered me. I always knew she was closer to Jane, but I never thought she'd side with her mother in something like this. It felt like she'd made her choice, and it wasn't me. That night, I made another decision. I wasn't going to reach out to them. If they wanted to fix this, they'd have to come to me. I wasn't going to chase after them, begging for their forgiveness or their explanations. They made their choices, and now they'd have to live with the consequences. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time since discovering the affair, I didn't feel completely lost. I had a plan. It wasn't much, and it wouldn't fix everything, but it was a start. I was done being the victim. From now on, I was going to take control. After 2 days of sitting in my brother's guest room, dodging calls and sorting through my emotions, I decided it was time to face Jane. Avoiding her wasn't going to change anything, and I had things I needed to say, things she needed to hear. I texted her late that night. "We need to talk. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the house." She responded almost immediately. "I'll be there. Please just let me explain." Explain? What was there to explain? I wasn't interested in excuses or half-hearted justifications, but I didn't reply. I figured I'd save it for when we were face to face. The next morning, I got up early and drove to our house. As soon as I walked through the door, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia and bitterness. This was our home, the place where we'd built a life, raised our kids, celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays. Now it felt hollow, like everything good that had happened here was tainted. Jane showed up right on time. She walked in nervously, her eyes red and puffy like she'd been crying for days. She was holding her phone in one hand like it was a shield, and I noticed she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. That detail stung more than it should have. "Thanks for agreeing to meet," she said softly, standing just inside the door like she was afraid to come any closer. "Don't thank me," I said. My voice came out colder than I expected. "I'm not here to make things easier for you." That set the tone for the conversation. We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we'd shared countless family dinners. She started talking right away, saying all the things I'd expected her to say. It wasn't serious. It didn't mean anything. It was a mistake. She kept repeating herself, cycling through the same tired lines, like if she said them enough, they'd start to sound believable. "Stop," I said finally, cutting her off. "I don't want to hear excuses, I want answers." She looked at me confused. "What do you mean? How long?" I asked. She hesitated. "A few months. Try again." Her face crumpled and she whispered, "Almost a year." I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my anger in check. A year. An entire year of lies. How many times had she smiled at me, kissed me, told me she loved me, all while sneaking around behind my back? "And the girls?" I asked. "How long have they known?" Jane winced, her eyes darting away. "Not the whole time. I told them a couple of months ago. I didn't mean to drag them into it, but you did," I interrupted. "You made them part of your lies. Do you have any idea what that's done to me?" She started crying then, full-on sobbing. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, but I was so unhappy and—" "Unhappy?" I snapped. My voice echoed in the empty house. "You were unhappy, so you decided to blow up our family? You were unhappy, so you cheated on me and dragged our daughters into your mess? Do you have any idea what you've done, Jane?" She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying into her hands. And for the first time, I didn't feel sorry for her. "You've ruined everything," I said quietly. "Not just our marriage, but my relationship with Alice and Maddie. How am I supposed to trust them after this? How am I supposed to look at them and not see this betrayal?" "I didn't want them to lie to you," she whispered. "I didn't want any of this." "Then why did you do it?" I asked. "Why didn't you come to me if you were so unhappy? Why didn't you try to fix things instead of sneaking around behind my back?" She didn't have an answer. Or maybe she did, but it didn't matter. Whatever she said wouldn't change what she'd done. After a long silence, I stood up. "I'm filing for divorce," I said. "You'll hear from my lawyer soon. Please don't do this," she begged, standing up too. "We can work through this. We can fix it." "There's nothing to fix," I said. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Before I walked out, I turned to her one last time. "By the way, don't expect me to pay for Alice's wedding anymore. She can ask her boss to foot the bill, since you're both so good at keeping secrets." Her face crumpled again, but I didn't stick around to see her reaction. On my way out of the house, I paused in the hallway, staring at the family photos hanging on the wall. There we were, me, Jane, Alice, and Maddie, smiling like the perfect family. I used to love those photos. Now they felt like a cruel joke. I grabbed the nearest one, a picture of us at Alice's high school graduation, and smashed it against the wall. The glass shattered, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of satisfaction, but it didn't last. As I walked to my car, I realized something. This was just the beginning. The confrontation with Jane was over, but the real battle was only starting. I still had to deal with Alice and Maddie. I still had to figure out how to move forward. And I still had to face the fact that the life I thought I had, the life I'd spent nearly 30 years building, was gone. The confrontation with Jane was just the first step. It cleared the air, sure, but it didn't make things easier. If anything, it made the betrayal feel heavier, more real. The anger I felt toward Jane was sharp, but it was focused. I knew what she'd done and why I was walking away. The situation with Alice and Maddie was murkier. They were my daughters, my flesh and blood, but they had chosen her. The day after I told Jane I was filing for divorce, I decided to meet with Alice and Maddie separately. I couldn't ignore them forever, and I wasn't ready to cut them off completely without at least hearing their side. But I also knew this wasn't going to be a casual chat. The trust between us was shattered, and I needed to know if there was anything left to salvage. I started with Maddie. She had always been the more emotional one, and her texts over the past few days had been borderline frantic. I asked her to meet me at a park near my brother's house. When she arrived, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her eyes were red and puffy, and she kept fidgeting with her hands. As soon as we sat down on a bench, she started crying. "Dad, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Then why did you lie to me?" I asked, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Why did you cover for your mother? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" She shook her head, wiping her eyes. "It wasn't like that. She told me about it a couple of months ago. I was mad at her, but she begged me not to say anything. She said she'd end it soon, that it was just a phase. I didn't know what to do." I stared at her, trying to process her words. "So, you decided to protect her instead of telling me the truth?" "I thought she was going to stop," Maddie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to blow up the family if there was a chance she'd fix things. I didn't know it would get this far." "That's not good enough, Maddie," I said. "You don't get to excuse what you did by saying you didn't know. You knew she was cheating. You knew she was lying to me, and you went along with it. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel?" She broke down again, covering her face with her hands. I felt a pang of guilt watching her cry, but I couldn't let it soften me. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the damage they'd all done to my trust. "I'm not saying this to punish you," I said finally, "but I need you to understand how deeply this has hurt me. Right now, I don't know if I can trust you. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you the way I used to." Maddie nodded, her shoulders shaking. "I'll do anything to fix this, Dad. Anything. Just tell me what to do." I didn't have an answer for her. I told her I needed time and left. My meeting with Alice was a completely different story. I asked her to meet me at a coffee shop, thinking it would be better to talk in a neutral space. She showed up 10 minutes late, looking polished and composed, as if nothing had happened. That alone rubbed me the wrong way. "Thanks for meeting me," she said as she sat down. I didn't waste any time. "Alice, why didn't you tell me about your mother's affair?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Dad, I didn't want to get involved. It's between you and Mom. I thought it was better to stay out of it." "Stay out of it?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't stay out of it, Alice. You lied to me. You covered for her. That's not staying out of it. That's choosing a side." "I wasn't choosing sides," she said defensively. "I was trying to keep the peace. I didn't want to make things worse." "Worse for who?" I asked. "For me? Or for your mother?" She didn't answer, which told me everything I needed to know. "Alice, you're an adult," I said. "You're getting married soon. If your fiancé did to you what your mother did to me, would you want everyone around you to lie and protect him? Or would you want someone to stand up and tell you the truth?" "That's different," she said, looking annoyed. "Mom made a mistake. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything away." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. "A mistake? Is that what you think this is?" "It is a mistake," she said firmly. "People make mistakes, Dad. You don't have to burn everything to the ground because of one bad choice." "One bad choice," I repeated, shaking my head. "Do you even hear yourself? This wasn't a bad choice. It was a betrayal. By your mother, by you, by Maddie. And you're sitting here acting like I'm overreacting." "I'm not saying that," she said quickly. "I just think you're being too harsh. You're hurt, I get that, but you'll regret cutting us out later. We're your family." "Family doesn't lie to each other," I said. "Family doesn't cover for someone who's tearing everything apart. You and Maddie didn't just lie to me. You broke my trust. And right now, I don't see how I can move past that." She crossed her arms, looking frustrated. "So what? You're just going to disown us? Pretend we don't exist?" "I don't know," I admitted, "but I can't pretend like nothing happened. I can't pretend like you didn't betray me." We sat in silence for a few minutes before I finally stood up. "I've said what I needed to say," I told her. "The rest is up to you." She didn't try to stop me as I walked out. That night, I sat alone in my brother's guest room, thinking about both conversations. Maddie seemed genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't sure if I could ever fully forgive her. Alice, on the other hand, was a different story. Her refusal to acknowledge the seriousness of what she'd done made it clear that she didn't think she was in the wrong. For the first time, I seriously considered cutting them both out of my life. It wasn't a decision I wanted to make, but the thought of trying to rebuild a relationship with people who had betrayed me so deeply felt impossible. That night, I finalized my decision. I called my lawyer the next morning and told her to revise my will. Alice and Maddie were to be removed as beneficiaries. Everything, my savings, my retirement fund, the house, would go to my sister and her kids. They had always been there for me, and I knew they wouldn't betray me like my own daughters had. When I told my brother, he didn't even try to talk me out of it. "You're doing the right thing," he said. "They made their choices. Now they can live with the consequences." The fallout was immediate. Maddie called me the next day, crying hysterically. "Dad, please don't do this," she said. "I know I messed up, but I love you. I don't care about the money. I just don't want to lose you." Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I stood my ground. "Maddie, I'll always love you," I said. "But love doesn't mean I can forget what you did. I need time. Maybe someday we can rebuild our relationship, but right now, I can't have you in my life." She kept crying, but eventually she hung up. Alice, predictably, took a different approach. She sent me a long email accusing me of being petty and vindictive. She said I was punishing her for trying to keep the peace and that I was ruining her wedding over something that had nothing to do with her. I didn't respond. There was no point. Jane tried to intervene too. She sent me an email, her tone polished, carefully constructed. She begged me not to cut the girls out of my will, claiming it wasn't fair to punish them for mistakes she had made. She even had the audacity to suggest that removing them would irreparably damage the family. I didn't reply to her either. As the days went on, I started to feel lighter. The anger was still there, but the weight of the betrayal didn't feel as suffocating anymore. Cutting ties wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I needed to protect myself, not just financially, but emotionally. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. It's been a month now since I cut them out of my will. I haven't spoken to Alice or Maddie since. I've heard from mutual friends that Alice is scrambling to find the money to cover the wedding expenses I had been paying for. I don't feel sorry for her. She made her choice when she chose to side with her mother. Maddie, I still think about. Part of me hopes that someday we can reconcile, but only if she truly understands the depth of her betrayal. Until then, I'm focusing on myself. Jane? She's nothing to me now. I don't care what she does or who she does it with. The divorce is moving forward, and my lawyer assures me that she won't get much. That's enough for me. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, cutting them all out of my life. But then I remind myself of one simple truth. They made their choices. Now I'm making mine. I'm finally free.